Hello everyone, I'm Rishi Persad. Welcome back to Racing Weekly, a podcast and YouTube show brought to you by oddschecker in association with Bet365. A lot to look back on from the weekend in the world of horse racing, a lot to look forward to. The July Festival just around the corner at Newmarket, and of course, as usual, I'll be doing that alongside Sam Turner. Sam, how have you been? Haven't seen you for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's been a while, Rishi. I've been missing you, obviously. Those pains never go away. Yeah, a couple of days at the cricket for me over the weekend, so a little bit jaded, a little bit of horse, but catching up with the horse racing this morning and last night, and some interesting events to talk about and get our teeth into for sure, isn't there, this weekend?
Yes, from the weekend, there's a lot to talk about. And of course, as you said, a lot of interesting angles about the July Festival. And to help us look through that a little bit later on, we're going to welcome one of the young stars of the training ranks, Harry Eustace, to the show. But we're going to start this week with our usual spot in Racing Recap. And first up, Sam, in Racing Recap, we're going to start with the Eclipse at Sandown. Now, beforehand, it looked to be a high-quality field, and it was a high-quality field. We can't take away from that. Were you satisfied, though, first of all, with the way the race was run and how it all panned out?
It was a bit of a cut-and-shut job, wasn't it? After the first 4 furlongs, they seemed to just troll along in their own sweet way, and then the pace really was injected when Bay Bridge went alongside Alenquer, probably after about four and a half furlongs, and that really lit the race up a little bit. And those two, for whatever reason, didn't deliver their best showing. Alenquer sort of bounced a little bit, perhaps off the Currer effort, and would have preferred a bit more juice in the ground. And Bay Bridge, that arguably became too quick for him as well after his effort at Ascot. So it was left to the other quartet to fight out the finish. It was a bit messy in the straight, as Sandown finishes can often be. Could have thrown a big horse blanket over the 4 of them crossing the line, but I think Vadeni possibly got the best tactical ride in the race, and just had that, Simeon just had that little target on the back of Native Trail and just used him to tow him into the race, keep Mishriff in that little pocket, and he wasn't quick enough to take full advantage of that gap, and Vadeni ultimately ran out, quite a snug winner really in the end, because by the time Mishriff got out and used that long raking stride of his, it was all too little too late.
Yeah, I felt that as well. I felt that Simeon gave his horse the cleanest ride in the race for whatever reason. I mean, I think William Buick was in a good position as well on Native Trail, but in the end, he looked to have every chance. I thought Native Trail just couldn't quite get. Of all the horses, I thought he was probably the one with least excuses. But there were others there that things did not clearly work out for. Mishriff being the obvious one. So overall, how good do you really think Vadeni is, having won the French Derby, followed up in the Eclipse against the older horses, beaten Native Trail? Is he a superstar?
I think he's the first French winner, if you excuse the disqualified horse, to win for France in 62 years. Now, less and less horses from across the channel have tried, unfortunately. But, it was great to see those colours carry the victory on a prominent marquee race day, as Sandown was on Saturday. Shame there weren't a few more people in to watch it, but that's another talking point. But yeah, there's not much of him, is he? He's a bit of a pocket rocket. I'd like to have seen him firsthand, but the pictures that you sort of see from the television coverage, compared to something like perhaps Mishriff, who's big, long back, galloping, raking stride type of horse. Vadeni's a bit more push button, and I think that served him well on Saturday with that bit of a stop-start gallop or a stop-start gallop, and he's sort of taken full advantage of that in the closing stages and just shown that little bit of brilliance and that electric turn of speed just to poach a lead on Mishriff and see it out well. The Irish champion will be a fascinating race. He follows a tried and tested path there, the likes of Almanzor, etc. It'll be fascinating to see how he goes on there. But I think looking forward and projecting forward to York, if we get all the runners that we might get for the Juddmonte, then Mishriff is a major player again there, where he takes on possibly Bade stepping up in trip. And, of course, the Derby winner, Desert Crown. So that looks a race for the ages, that.
That might be one of the best races we've seen in a long time. Hopefully they all turn up, though. I just wanted to ask you one more question about Vadeni, because after the race, Christophe Soumillon spoke about him in the same breath as Zakava and Dalakani. See, those two horses won the Arc, and you're talking about quite a light, seemingly small pocket rocket, as you describe him. whether or not he can sustain and still be ahead of his contemporaries come Arc time.
Oh, when the Arc's bubbling up to be quite a race, isn't it?
Plus ça change.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, I think. Obviously they have a lot more knowledge of the horse than I possibly will. I've probably only seen him run 2 or 3 times in his life, and he just doesn't strike me as that type of robust horse that would probably be well suited to the Arc, especially when you get a little bit of winter ground in the autumn. But, he's in the hands of a master, both as a trainer and as jockey, and who am I to quibble with them? If they feel that they've got an Arc horse, then certainly that would be the way to go with him. I think it's great to see him so aggressively campaigned around Europe. I think that's terrific. The fact that he's been over to England for the Eclipse, he's then off to Ireland for the Champion Stakes. I think that's a brilliant bit of campaigning. It'll be fascinating to see how he gets on as the season wears on.
Okay. Obviously, a lot more to come from a lot of those horses that we saw in the Eclipse. And a lot coming already from a sprinter who has made remarkable strides. And that, of course, is Rasal, owned by the Horse Watchers, who've got such a good record now for their purchases of horses that have improved. And this is a horse who's, winning handicaps of a mark in the 70s and 80s last season. Now here he is, winning that race, that Group 3 at Sandown. And who knows what the future might hold. What did you think of the performance of Rasal?
Thought it was a brilliant ride. James Dorr was keen to try and get some cover, but not get involved and locked up inside at Sandown. I mean, even on the straight track, we see trouble in running at Sandown. It's one of those tracks, I think, that just attracts it. And Mitabay's connections will probably point to that. The fact that they suffered more than most in that race, and they would arguably say they were unlucky, and they probably have a very good point. But I think Rasal's the type of horse that always just finds a little bit more when he has to. And I thought James, who's got a great record on him, rode him beautifully on Saturday. Just managed to get cover without getting, as I say, embroiled in all the trouble that was happening on the inside. Got that clean shot at it, the slingshot down the outside at Sandown. And when you're coming down the middle now, because there isn't such a far side bias, you sort of start to lean in a little bit on all those other horses and tighten them all up, and you're gaining momentum and you're almost half stopping them in their run. And I do think you get more out of your horse when they start passing horses. And obviously he was produced with a great turn of foot. He goes very well at Goodwood. I would imagine that the sprint there would be tailor-made for him, really. I think he's 2 from 2 at Goodwood. He handles their undulations very well. And I think that's quite an important factor when you get to the Glorious Meeting. And I think he can just keep thriving and progressing. I mean, he was always doing really good speed figures when he was winning those 0 to 80, 0 to 90 Nottingham handicaps. I remember saying to Martin, I think you've got a good one here. I think he's, every time he runs, he knocks the ball out of the park, really, with the speed figure that he gets. And as we know, there's a very fine line when you get an improving sprint handicapper and they step up into listed and group company, perhaps at the bottom rung of the pattern class, but nevertheless group company. There isn't that big a bridge to cross, really. They can sometimes make those leaps very comfortably, and we're seeing that with Rasal at the moment. He's just thriving and improving, and where's his ceiling?
Good question. I mean, 10 grand he cost, Rasal, tremendous purchase, and I think he's 14 to 1 with Bet365 for the Nunthorpe, obviously the highest level. But the way he's progressing, you have no idea as to just how far he could go, and that's the exciting thing if you're involved with it, I suppose.
I love his versatility. I mean, Goodwood, York, Sandown, Nottingham, Haydock. This lad does it at every track, really. And Mick Appleby's done a wonderful job with him, really bringing him through. And obviously, he's the apple of the Horse Watcher's eye. And you can understand why, really, because he's been an absolute star purchase for them, and he's a great advertisement for their syndicates.
Well, fantastic stuff from Rasal at Sandown. Some very good racing at Haydock as well on the weekend. And the first step on our look back at the racing at Haydock, the Bet365 Lancashire Oaks. Now, a lot to talk about in the outcome of that race. And we'll talk more about the jockeys and how things panned out a little bit later on in the show, Sam. But let's just talk about Free Win, first of all, who overcame an enormous amount of traffic and incident to get up and win on her first start of the season.
Yeah, real class performance, wasn't it? I mean, you imagine when you're driving down a motorway and you know, like you do, you know, probably 99, no, within the limits, Rishi, obviously, and you know, somebody pulls out on you and stops you in your stride, and then you have to get back going again. I mean, that's exactly what happened to Free Win, really. You know, she was burrowing away up that rail, looking for that gap, got stopped in her tracks, more of which we'll cover later, no doubt. And then to find the ability, the talent, the class to then quicken up again and go and, you know, overhaul Sela Rosa, who's a very good filly in her own right, and win going away under a hands and heels Rab Havlin ride. I thought that was a performance of true class, really. Outstanding
performance. Also, one element to include in our conversation here is John Gosden, Rab Havlin. Obviously, we'll talk more again about Frankie Dettori and John Gosden a little bit later on, but quite nice for Rab Havlin to have the opportunity on a filly like that in a biggish race, and despite all the trouble, he's got the job done.
Don't forget Thady.
John and Thady Gosden, indeed.
What do they run, the Gosdens? They run 7 horses on Saturday, 5-1, and the 2 that were beaten a length. In Lord North's case, who ran an absolute blinder, didn't he, off the back of that Ascot performance in the Eclipse, and Mishriff got beaten in neck and was very unlucky. So they could have had an absolutely marquee day, really. But yes, I mean, these opportunities are presenting themselves for Rab now, and it's up to him to take it. I mean, he's got the experience on his side that, you know, look, he's never going to have the class of Frankie Dettori, but he's a very, very capable rider. And if the horse is good enough, Rab is invariably good enough. He's obviously been a good schoolmaster for a lot of these 2-year-olds and younger horses that have come through that needed considerate handling, and a good horseman on top. And he's done that job particularly well. The likes of, you know, James Dorr might come in for 1 or 2 more rides going forward. Benoit de la Sayette. So it's going to be shared around a bit. And obviously we saw Ryan Moore to good effect on Grand Dam as well. So the Gosden team are going to use the best possible, but obviously stay loyal to their crop of jockeys.
Well, if you are interested in the winner of the Bet365 Lancashire Oaks, Free Wind going for the Yorkshire Oaks at the Ebor Festival. She is currently around 6-1 with Bet365. Obviously, her stablemate Emily Upjohn is also a potential runner in that race. I mentioned a couple of other races from the weekend, Sam. Another one from Haydock, the Old Newton Cup, the Bet365 Old Newton Cup. Get Shirty, who's clearly in magnificent form at the moment. I thought it was a really good performance. Ghazi was the horse that everyone was talking about. I thought Ghazi had every chance, just wasn't quite good enough at the weights on the day. Yeah, again, we see, you know, Danny Tudhope. I mean, he advertised his abilities as if they needed advertising at Royal Ascot from a limited number of opportunities, rode a number of winners, some good placed horses as well. And he's rapidly becoming the man for the big occasion, really. Obviously, he can't do light weights, and that probably stops him from getting one of the top jobs. But, you know, he is being utilised by a raft of owners at the moment, and some high-profile ones as well. And he's just showing that on a big stage he can deliver time and time again. And Get Shirty, incredible performance, really, at the age of 6 to back up that Ascot performance. Just a wonderful effort on Saturday again, really. You know, Ghazi got caught in a bit of traffic. Another solid run from Enfranchise. I mean, she just keeps going to the well and is a typical Johnson horse. I wouldn't be surprised to see her in a handicap. Just checking the entries now this week at Newmarket. But she's just the type of filly that you can rate the race around a little bit. There were 1 or 2 hard luck stories that were a bit messy late on, but as usual, Danny Tudhope, right place at the right time and prevailed quite tidily. Absolutely. Also give notable mentions. You've already mentioned Grand Dame, who won so impressively at Sandown, and also Sinjari. Dear old Sinjari, for those of us who had our fingers burnt in the Royal Hunt Cup. Kieran Schumacher delivered him beautifully on Saturday to win at Sandown. But even beyond all of that, Sam, I think yesterday, Sunday's racing over in France, the Grand Prix de Saint-Cloud, because Alpinista returned with a quite brilliant performance. Quite brilliant. Of course, she beat the ARC winner last year, Torquato Tasso, and she's now won 4 Group 1s. If this filly isn't a live ARC contender, then I do not know what is. She's 12-1 with Bet365 for the big race. What are your thoughts on what she did, and what are your thoughts on her ARC hopes? Well,
I think she's been beautifully trained. Now, obviously, we haven't seen her for God knows how long. Was it 300 days or something ridiculous, or however long it was? And I think she probably surprised them a little bit because the way that she quickened and accelerated, especially first time off the shelf as well. I think they were very much. She just did come right enough at home, I think, to make this race, and it was very much a stepping stone through to the autumn, because obviously she thrived with a bit of cut in the ground in the autumn, although connections have been at points to say that they feel that she's going to be just as good a horse on better ground, and she certainly proved that at Saint Cloud over the weekend. Really like the way that she quickened there, accelerated, showed the gears that weren't always apparent before, but they were probably being dulled, and her natural brilliance was being dulled by the racing surface that she was having to race on. So, it's like a lot of these things, isn't it? We always sort of pigeonhole horses as soft ground horses until they have the opportunity to run on something a little bit better. And good racehorses and class racehorses from good bloodlines like her, they just want the opportunity to race on a nice, fair racing surface and showcase their talents. And she certainly did that. Now, where she goes next is open to question, really. It's not the Prescott way, is it, really, to rush horses? But, the King George, those are all races, Yorkshire Oaks, those sort of stepping stones all towards the arc. But I think they'll work back from Longchamp, won't they?
Yeah, you would imagine. Of course, it was just about 12 months ago that she won the Bet365 Lancashire Oaks before going on that Group 1 winning spree in Germany. Here she is a year later as a live arc hope. That's Alpinista. We're going to move on and talk about some of the racing ahead of us, Sam, at the July Festival. And our first port of call will be for the 2-year-olds in the July Stakes, which comes up on Thursday. Persian Force, who ran such a fine race in the Coventry against Little Big Bear in the July Stakes. How do you see this race? I mean, I quite like Mysterious Night of Charlie Appleby's personally in that.
Yeah, I thought you'd be drawn to him. He looks quite flashy, doesn't he?
Well, I tell you why I'm drawn to him. He's a full brother to a Group 1 winner, filly of theirs called Althika. And she's a tiny little thing. I've seen her a few times in the flesh, and she's small. Obviously very talented. She's a great one, but he's a completely different model. He's massive. He's huge, and he's had 2 runs, and I can see why Charlie Appleby didn't pitch him in at Royal Ascot after he ran pretty well first time up and gave him another softish race at Newbury. The more racing he has, I think the better. Yeah, not talking about mentally, just physically, he needs that because he's such a big unit.
Yeah, I thought he was learning on the job a little bit at Newbury. He sort of weaved around a little bit and then flashed the tail, but I think that was inexperience more than anything untoward. But I don't think he'll mind coming back in trip either to 6. I don't know whether the petrol gauge was flashing a bit at the end, but he just wasn't extending as I thought he ought to for the price that he was, and given that first run at Newbury, which was also a pretty polished performance behind Dark 30. Yeah, I think he's definitely a live one outside the main 2 protagonists. I mean, the clear form picks, I think, are obviously the horses that you touched on there. Little Big Bear. I mean, he comes out of that listed race, the Windsor Castle at Royal Ascot. And that race has worked out incredibly well. The horse that he just beat, Rocket Rodney, bolted up next time. There's 3 or 4 horses come out of it, including a nursery winner at Haydock Saturday and other better class winners as well. So that race is already working out pretty nicely. It's whether you trust the Windsor Castle form against the Coventry form, really, of Persian Force. Now, I was a little disappointed how Persian Force travelled through that race. I thought he'd travel a little bit better in the Coventry, given that he had the speed to bolt up at Doncaster over 5, given that he looked as though, he was, a very comfortable winner in a minor race next time at Newbury as well. I thought he might travel a bit stronger through that. It could be a case that Bradsell's just an aeroplane and put him in his place and got the clean run of it. And Persian Force was sort of locked in amongst runners a little bit and probably a bit claustrophobic. And when he got out, he did stay on pretty well. I think it's very difficult to choose between those 2 for me. I think they might just have a bit too much nous for Mysterious Night myself. And Little Big Bear, I think, will certainly relish going up to 6. They both did very similar speed figures at Ascot as well, so it's a real flip of a coin job for me. I think I'd have to wait to see the draw before I nail my colours to a particular mast.
All right, that's fair enough. Also on Thursday, which is the same day as the July Stakes, they've got the Princess of Wales Stakes at Newmarket. Mostadaf, Yabir, Hamish look like they might be lining up for the race. Mostadaf ran in the Hardwick Royal Ascot behind Broome. I should have mentioned Hurricane Lane, by the way, who was behind him that day.
Yeah.
Ran in the Grand Prix de Saint-Cloud, expected to run well, was a short price favourite. I think this is going to be a huge test for Charlie Appleby and his team and their skills, because he looked like he might have had enough for the moment.
Yes, yeah, perhaps a long and arduous campaign last year, and he just hasn't quite got over that. And they're represented in this race with Yabir, who looks less straightforward, doesn't he? With the hood on, beaten at 4 on 2 starts ago.
I like the horse a lot because of that.
Yeah.
But he's not straightforward.
Do you like the horse a lot if you bet him at 4 on? No. He always contrives to find a way of getting beat, though, doesn't he?
He does, but he clearly has the ability to win this race. I mean,
yes.
He was at his best. You know, what prize? If you knew that Yabir was going to try, what prize, would he be?
He's like Nick Kyrgios, isn't he? Except he doesn't win very often. But I bet he gives Charlie a bit of jip in the mornings as well. Good old Nick Kyrgios. Every shot he hits that's a winner is down to him, and every shot that he hits that finds the net is his box's fault, isn't it? And his connections fault. Anyway, we digress. Mostadaf is probably a rather more straightforward horse, and he might prefer. I mean, the July course, although there is a rise to the line, it's much more got the accent on speed and position and being able to travel through races there. Whereas Ascot suited Broome, long grind from the home turn, made plenty of use of him. I think I would just prefer Mostadaf at this stage, just because he's a little bit more of a straightforward horse and probably got slightly less miles on the clock, and he hasn't been to America recently, so I'll probably go with him.
All right. The Falmouth on Friday. Interesting from a news point of view as anything else, because really, Inspiral, who's very short and expected to win, should do on all known form. She's obviously an outstanding filly. But who do you think will ride?
Good point. Rob Havlin knows her.
Well, 5 starts. Rab Havlin rode her first time out, and after that, which is understandable, because the first start came Newmarket in a maiden last year, when I think Frankie would have probably had a quiet day. And since she won, Frankie's ridden her every single time since that first start last June. So, how would you play it? I mean, because this is the reason why I think this one's interesting is because I think Cheveley Park are generally pretty loyal.
Yeah. Obviously, Aidan O'Brien's got 3 in the race, one of which is Tenebrism. Now, you would imagine that if she runs, Ryan rides. So does that, you then perhaps go to one of their other riders, Tom Marquand?
The thing, there's chat about the fact that Frankie cannot ride because he's got to go to America because he's riding on Saturday. But surely Frankie can find a flight out of the UK after riding. I mean, what time's Inspiral's race? It's 3:35 on Friday.
Did I catch some quotes from John Gosden, who was saying he needs to be at the airport early, you don't want to miss the flight, and it was almost like he was his travel agent and making sure that he didn't miss any of those security checks and got there with plenty of time. So that didn't scream to me like somebody who was like very keen to continue that association on this horse, did it?
That's if you flip reverse the way the situation had gone, you could imagine that conversation saying, well, if you'd said, would Frankie have been able to ride Inspiral and go to America? And the American races on Saturday. He can ride on Friday afternoon and then get a flight out Friday night and be in America on Saturday morning. I don't know.
He's done that 1,000 times, hasn't he?
Yeah.
In his career, jockeys do that. They might even ride in Dubai on Saturday night, and you see them at Goodwood on a Sunday Sunday afternoon. So they're well practiced to doing it. And of course, you go business class, you get a bit of sleep. Like you, Rishi, you probably use your contacts and get himself a nice flight.
Only those days are long gone. She's going to win, right? She's going to win. We know that, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, she is going to win. I mean, even if she was 85, 90%, like they seem to think at Ascot, even a repeat of that would be good enough here. When you look down the list of the horses that she's against, I don't know much about Christopher Head's horse, I've got to be honest. The jury's out with alcohol free, lights on, is she the class? Concert Hall over a mile, Heredia ran at the weekend. Prosperous Voyage was disappointing at Ascot. Sandrine, you could make a case for her hitting the frame, but she's yet to really confirm that this trip is what she wants. Tenebrism, she's beaten that horse very comfortably. off a bad preparation. And Toy, the one I could see sort of sneaking into the frame at a big price because she ran well in the race last year was Primo Bacio, but she's looked a little bit of a light of a form herself. And, you know, I just thought there were signs that she was coming back a little bit at Ascot last time. I think she might be 20, 25 to 1, something along those lines. And, you know, if they were to say that this is absolutely the plan, I think there'd be worse 25 to 1 chances there. She only beaten a length or 2 by Snow Lantern last year in what looked a very, very good renewal. I'm not sure this is good. You know, obviously the Spiral accepted. Yeah,
I would agree with that. The July Cup on Saturday. I think this is a great opportunity for Perfect Power to stamp his authority as the potential champion sprinter of the season. He is 9-4 favourite with Bet365. Sprinting is obviously his game. Glad that they had a go. Glad that they took the old traditional route, running a trial and then have a dip at the Guineas. But you saw at Royal Ascot what this horse has got in the locker for sprinting.
Yes, it was a tremendously powerful performance, and his back end work was extraordinary, really. How he just put in an extra gear and won that Commonwealth Cup in style. I mean, there was a few horses that disappointed, but you can't take it away from him. He was tremendous in victory. Slightly different track here. I mean, Ascot obviously suits him very well. He took a while to engage top gear, but so did Starman in this race last year, and he found all sorts of trouble and still won power and clear. And there is a certain similarity between the run styles of both of these, actually, that both look star sprinters, but both who find plenty off the bridle. And, you know, they go from 3rd to 5th. It takes them a little bit of time, but once they're there, it's almost relentless. I think he's a very fair favourite. I mean, there's been a good few 3-year-olds have won this recently, as you know, mostly trained by Aidan O'Brien, but they have got a good record in the race by the time we get to early July. And I thought he's the obvious starting point. The one I sort of came down on the side of to perhaps beat him as an each way perspective was Creative Force, who ran in the race last year, tried to burrow away up the stand side rail, didn't get the clearest passage. No excuses, because there was a bit of trouble in the race and he probably found less than some, but he was only beaten a couple of lengths by Starman at the line. That was as a 3-year-old, a year older now. Good performance at Ascot in that Platinum Jubilee. Having tipped him, I was a bit frustrated to see his stablemate come up the stand side rail, which everybody thought was the dead rail until the 7 furlong race there earlier on the card. And, you know, he just got nosed out of it. You know, a lot of people will think that Artorias was unlucky, but that's him a little bit. He has to be ridden like that. He's ridden like that in Australia. And I wonder if there's a big field Saturday, whether he's going to find traffic difficult to come through again on a track which favours those that race a little bit more prominently. So I'll probably just plump for Creative Force on a value perspective each way. You know, I think it's 9-2 with Bet365 this morning.
All right. Well, the first 3 home in the Platinum Jubilee that you mentioned, obviously Creative Force, Artorias, Naval Crown, who came out on top. They're all lining up again. Obviously against Perfect Power, and there's some horses in behind in that race, so I think are probably a little bit better than they showed on the day. One of the big price. I love Double or Bubble. I don't know if she's going to go for the race or not. She travelled beautifully in the Platinum Jubilee, and that stiff 6 at Ascot found her out. I think she just backed out of it right at the end, but she's about, what price is she? She's a big price. 40. Just, you know. Keep an eye. I think she'll go close in a big sprint this season. But
yeah,
I mean, I think Perfect Power is going to be champion sprinter this season.
I think if this race was run on the Rowley Mile, I'd really want to back her. She's got a great record there, hasn't she?
She has got a great record at Newmarket, but better on the Rowley Mile. So that's a look at the July Cup. Just before we close off this section, Sam, just take your what we're dubbing the Turner tip for the week.
The Turner tip for the week. I suppose it'd have to be Creative Force each way at this stage. Hopefully you'll get a fairly decent draw in and around some pace and close perhaps to Perfect Power as well. And then we'll see, you know, those 2 lines of form from the 2 major sprint races at Ascot will be lined up, and it'll be interesting to see and fascinating to see how they get on. But I'd like to see Will Buick choose to ride him.
Yeah,
that would add a bit of confidence. As yet, there aren't any jockey bookings or clarifications yet.
Okay. Can I give a little selection to follow?
Please do.
John Smith's Cup on Saturday at York. Rogue Bear, who run some really good races this season. Hasn't quite had the rub of the green.
Please God he settles, Rish. Please
Well,
God he settles.
he has to get into the race first of all, but if he does get in the race, I'm hoping he settles and runs a decent one. So
Yeah,
cross for him.
horse, isn't he?
Yeah, he's been a little bit unlucky the way things have panned out, but hopefully he's had a little bit of a break since his last run and freshened up. That might work. But Creative Force, the Turner tip for the week ahead on Racing Weekly. What more could you possibly want? People might be switching off after this. Don't. Now, later this week, you will see a behind-the-scenes view of Park Lodge Stables to see how young trainer Harry Eustace's small but growing operation works and the journey that led him there. We get an interesting insight into the chances of Ancient Times, who is due to run on Friday, and also look back at Latin Lover's victory at Royal Ascot. But we are also lucky enough to be joined by him now on Racing Weekly. First of all, Harry, thank you very much for taking the time out, because we know how busy all trainers are. But in particular, a Royal Ascot winning trainer with, I imagine, quite a lot of attention. So how are you, and how have things been since Royal Ascot?
Morning, guys. Very good, thanks. Obviously, we enjoyed it as I feel everyone should, as a first Royal Ascot winner, and yeah, it's been a fantastic response from friends, family, everyone in the industry. It's been, I don't think I realised how big a deal it was until my phone absolutely blew up. Obviously on the day, but it sort of kept coming, and it was obviously a massive thrill and a huge stepping stone in my career for sure.
Tell me, what expectations did you go with on the day, considering, first Royal Ascot runner, you've hardly been training for more than 5 minutes, really, in the grand scheme of things. Was there confidence, though?
Yes, obviously. I mean, I don't think, certainly having worked for William Haggis, I wasn't going to be one to have a runner for a day out. And if I'm honest, we scraped in 28 of 28, and that felt like a win. So, everything else after that wasn't a bonus, but it took a lot of the pressure off in the run up to the race, because, as I say, we were just so excited to get in, and I nearly didn't run him, which sounds ridiculous, but having worked for William, as I said, Ascot has to be the plan. You can't arrive sort of half-cocked, and winning at Kempton meant getting in on the penalty, and I wasn't sure it was the right thing to do. But I said I'd sort of been running him over 6 this year, and actually I think I've been getting him wrong, and a stiff 5 is what he wants. And I said to the guys who own him, we're looking for a sort of 5 furlong 3-year-old handicap. And I was looking through the program, and frankly, he was in it. And I said, there's no reason that we shouldn't go there. But I think the confidence really started coming when Pricewise tipped him, because certainly when I was growing up, he was the man. And if he thought it was a good idea to run, then I'm now confident it was a good idea to run. So.
Can you describe the feel? I mean, people always go, "Oh, Rishi, you always ask people how they feel," but to be honest, that's what it's about. Can you describe?
100%. I mean, it was by far and away one of the best feelings you will ever experience. And I mean, I'm sure everyone watches them differently, but my heart rate usually starts climbing as they start going in the stalls, especially, and obviously, and that's for all runners at the moment. We're still a pretty small operation, so the amount of work that goes into getting one there, it's the expectation and the hope. It's hope, I think, in particular, that builds it. And then obviously they jump out, and through the run you've an idea of how you think you're going to run. You have ideas of how you think the race is going to develop, and if it starts coming out the way you think, then that only builds the heart rate. And of course, that building of tension, it's then the release of that's the emotion after a race, and that feeling is, you know, almost impossible to sort of create outside of that sort of situation. And I just sort of couldn't believe it was happening at the time, and very luckily I was surrounded by people that found it as exciting as I did, and everyone around us, I'd imagine, well, they certainly knew who the winning connections were by the time you'd crossed the line, put it that way.
Well, fabulous stuff. I mean, obviously we know of the pedigree of Harry Eustace. You know, the other thing is you used to share a flat with Ollie Bell, who I work with and who's a pal, and I asked him for some info on you ahead of this chat. And can I tell you how he started this message back?
Sure.
It begins with, "Hey mate, there's nothing wildly interesting." I thought it was a bit brutal. In fairness,
no, that's because one of us worked at the time.
Well, he tells me that he used to play online poker and he used to watch racing all the time.
Yeah, so it would be soul destroying. I would wake up to come downstairs to go to work, and he was still up playing online poker, and he was like, he used to call himself the bellboy, and he would be like, "Oh yeah, I'm doing really well, sort of 4th, 5th, you know, I'm in the running for X amount," which was a long way and away, a lot more than I made in a year. And there was I sort of hacking off at 5 in the morning to do the job. But it's worked out well for both of us in the end, I suppose.
Well, you're the bigger star now. You're the biggest.
I'm not sure.
But just give people an idea. Obviously, we know your dad James, very successful in his own right, but your journey into training horses, because you've had experience elsewhere, and was it always the destiny to end up taking over from your dad?
Well, yeah, obviously growing up with a trainer is, well, it's very lucky. I was very lucky to, you know, everyone says it, but it's a fantastic sport and industry, and to have it such an immediate entrance and to grow up with it is huge. And anyone that comes into the sport outside of racing, I have huge kudos for, because it's a very difficult industry to get a grasp on, to then be able to find a job in it. And so for people that do get into it, it shows the passion they have for it. And luckily for me, you know, I have that passion too. And I've got, you know, friends of sons of trainers who aren't in racing, and it wasn't their passion as such. So, you know, school holidays and stuff was always working in the yard, and that was great. Loved it, and a great insight. And I think the most important part of the whole thing, especially with Dad, was it's hard and it's long and it's a marathon, and we're in this for a long time. And mentally knowing that can make it, the hard times, a little bit easier, I think, because everyone has them. You know, when I was growing up, Henry went down to about 10 or 15 horses. Michael Jarvis went down to about 10. And they trained Art winners, Derby winners. I mean, they were some of the best. So knowing that is a real comfort, because there will be hard periods, and it's sort of getting through that, I think. But it didn't put us off, I suppose. And I took a different route to my brother. I actually did go to uni for a bit to get a degree in case training didn't work. But it's not really the right attitude to have going in to get a degree. And so I got sort of halfway through, and I was like, I'm wasting my time and money here. And so, I don't get me wrong, it was still a great decision to go. Sorry?
What degree were you doing?
I did chemistry.
My goodness.
And at Edinburgh.
A racehorse trainer.
And I had a brilliant time at Edinburgh. It's a fantastic city, and I don't regret going, because it allowed me to enjoy a time of my life that you can't do when you're involved in horses as such. It's harder, they're 24/7. So And I met some great friends outside of racing who I still stay in touch with today, obviously, and it's great to have them. But I needed to move on. It just wasn't right, and I felt that time was ticking away slightly because it's a long apprenticeship before getting your license out. So I got a job in Australia, and I went down and worked for Lee and Anthony Freeman at Markdale on Mornington Peninsula.
Wow.
And I also worked for Paul Snowden, who at the time was training for Godolphin. And that was brilliant, a real eye-opener. I mean, it was very much in at the deep end, knew nothing about Aussie racing, and worked hard. Like the Aussies, they're great. You work hard, and then after that, when all's said and done, then you have a beer at the end of it. But they work hard, and they usually work hours that you shouldn't be working at. But great insight, set me up really well to come back home. I actually did a 6-month course on the Irish National Stud course then.
Right.
I was very conscious. I knew quite a bit about the racing side and none about the breeding side, and being able to appreciate how a breeder and the hardship of being a breeder, I think was a massive plus, and I loved it. I had a fantastic time, learned a huge amount because it's so much different than I ever realized. I remember being asked to go and check a horse that was in the paddock. Yeah. And of course the racing side of it, all we ever do is check legs, constantly checking legs. So I went and checked its legs. It's a 12-year-old mare, no one cares if it's got a tendon. But I was asked to check its bag, which is to tell them whether it's close to foaling or not, and I didn't have a clue what they were on about. So it was a great insight, Then I worked for Jeremy Nazida for 2 years, and very sharp, shrewd guy, very interesting to work for. Had some decent horses, Grand Jury campaigned very well to America, and was very interesting to work for, meticulous attention to detail. And then after that, I went to America and worked for Christophe Clement for 2.5 years. He'd worked obviously in Newmarket, knew my dad, so that was a connection there, and had an absolute ball. Really enjoyed it out there. Fascinating again. It's very easy to knock American racing if you don't understand it and you don't know the names and the jockeys and the tracks, and it all looks very boring. And I can, appreciate that, but it's a very different way of doing it, but it was very interesting, and I learned a lot about horse management and horsemanship, basically. And Christophe's fantastic, and he could make you look very stupid on the end of a shank holding a horse, because we used to trot horses up after they'd galloped, and they'd mess around, and he couldn't see if they were sound or not. Yeah. And he'd say, "Give it here," and he'd take it off you, and then it would float like a lamb down the road and back, and then he'd hand it back to you, and inevitably it messed about and made you look stupid again. So then just take it in. But so that was fantastic. And then I'd emailed William sort of the winter before I actually went down, and said, if I came home, it would be to work for someone like William or Sir Michael or Gosden, frankly. And middle of the season, he messaged me and said, space has come available, but you'd need to go now. And Christophe was very understanding, and so I packed my bags pretty quickly and started the week after Ascot. And I think for them, they'd had a quiet start for the year, and there were a lot of names to learn, both lads and horses. And it was sort of very much in the deep end. I mean, the first week after Ascot, the whole show's running. So 6 months it took to find my feet properly. And after that, we, just had some of the best times and worked with some of the best horses. And again, all you're doing is learning, whether it's more you're learning about the experiences, and the more horses and the more situations you're in, the more you're learning. And that's what I learned more than anything from them.
If there is one thing that stood out, I mean, considering all the people that you have had experience from the Friedmans, the Snowdens, Christophe Clement, obviously Nasida, William, I mean, would there be one thing that you consider the most valuable lesson above all else through that entire spell? I mean, is there something that really stood out during all of that?
I don't know if there's a particular sort of point, but they never stopped. They never got comfortable. And I think that's absolutely key. I don't know if relentless is the right word, but it's a continuous sport. And however well you've done the day before, you have to look forward. And they never rested on their laurels and enjoyed overly. I mean, they obviously enjoyed them, but they never thought, I've completed racing. You know, they knew how hard it was, and that if they eased up, that's when mistakes happen or whatever, and it would just slip away. So they never, which is intense and it's hard. And that's why not everyone can do it, because it's to constantly push yourself either to that level or to always improve is hard work and takes a sort of particular type of drive and mindset.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because there's a whole new generation of trainers in the sport. You know,
unfortunately for me, yeah.
Well, but
no, it's great. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I think it's fortunate because
it's fantastic. Yeah.
And I'm saying that very selfishly, Harry, because from the media's point of view, it's changed a lot from the days dealing with trainers who are very reluctant to share information, even to have a conversation enough to give you a little bit of an insight into things like you're doing. How conscious are you of the fact that, you know, marketing Harry Eustace, the human being, is as important as marketing Harry Eustace, the trainer?
Yeah, I think more than ever, they now come as a two, and we talk about personalities and people, but I sell myself because I want people to have a horse with me, myself, first and foremost, as much as what I've proved on the racetrack, because if they choose to have one with me, I feel there'll be more longevity, because I don't change. My stats might, and I might have an off year or you know, a bug in the yard or whatever, but if they've had it with me, then I hope that means that the relationship lasts longer. And that's what it's all about, is retaining owners that like and want to have horses with you.
That sounds like a good sales pitch. We'll clip that up and we'll send it to you.
Please do, yeah.
And also, I know from almost every conversation I've ever had with a trainer over the years, and I'm sure Sam's the same, when you talk about them, they always, or you talk to them about success and things, they always talk about the team in which they work. And you're only as good as your team. You're only as good as the people who look after the horses, who care for them, who make suggestions and advise, etc. Tell me about your team, which of course includes Hayley Turner, who, amongst other things, looks after your socials as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I was very fortunate in particular. I mean, the main part of my team, obviously, were my parents, who still live on the yard and still love it.
Yeah.
And the way they managed to sort of hand it over and still stay a part of it, I think, just sort of shows the sort of people that they are. And I think everyone who's met them knows that. Dad still rides the hat two lots a day and is very involved, but doesn't get in the way too much and doesn't question decisions too much, which is the main part. And Mum was always the books and the accounts, and she still sort of keeps an eye on it. But Kelly, who is new, is in the office, and she's been a massive part of sort of organising my life as much as anything. But a big part, I inherited Justin Wigg, who's my head lad from Dad. And initially all the lads that were with Dad stayed, but he by far is absolutely integral, because I have absolute confidence in him, and it means that when I go to the race or go to the sales, there's someone behind me making right decisions all the time that I know I agree with, and we get on very well. So he's obviously a massive part. And then it's all of them really. It's Tony and Abby who do their travelling. It's Nassim, Becky, and Imi in the yards, and it's the lads riding out, and everyone does go on about them because they're not talked about enough, frankly. And a week for stable staff is fantastic, but they are the sort of lifeblood of it really, because they take them to the races, they feed them, they water them, they muck them out, they do the bits that aren't that fun, and they do it sort of without much sort of grumbling.
And ultimately, what makes it all worthwhile is when you have the great days as you had with Latin Lover. So just looking ahead to the week, obviously I've had a look through it. There are quite a few entries, but there's one at Newmarket that we're all particularly interested in, which is Ancient Times for Friday. Of all the runners that you have potentially running over the next few days, is that the one you're most looking forward to?
Yeah, I think so. He's been quietly progressive this year. He surprised me at Donny first time out. I thought it was quite tough to go and win over 5 first start, having not run over 5 for a while, and got put up enough that I'd have to run him again. The dash had sort of been in the back of my mind through the winter, but off winning at Donny, I could leave him alone and freshen him up for the dash and hope to get in. And as it transpired, it rained at Epsom, and we also had him up at Musselburgh, and unusually enough, it was fast ground in Scotland and soft ground in London. So we went to Scotland, and luckily that came off, and he's just beginning to be quite a professional sprinter, and I hope is still well handicapped. It's a 0 to 90 on Friday at Newmarket, and it could be, well, whatever happens, it's probably the last time we'll run in a 0 to 90. He'll sort of progress into the sort of slightly more heritage handicaps, but it does look a good spot. Weather does look right for him. He can't have it too fast. He loves fast ground, and he seems to be training well. So I'm hopeful of a big run. He loves a sharp 5. My only concern is the last 100 yards. Stiff enough, and a lot changes there in the last 100. So we'll see. But Hayley gets on it with him very well, and if she gives him a kick in the belly rolling into the dip, let's hope he's running out of it the other side just as quick. He did a short, sharp bit of work with Artorias on Friday at the July course, which was great. Gave us a chance to let him have a look at it, because he has run there before and he was a bit disappointing. So that's my only sort of worry at this stage, probably.
I was going to ask about that run, Harry, if I may just jump in. It looked quite loose watching the video again this morning. It looked a bit loose for him there.
Yeah, 2 things that day. I think he hated the ground, but even more so, he got very wound up beforehand, which can happen at both Newmarket tracks for Newmarket trainers, because they think they're another day done, and then you pop them on a box and put them up there. And for some reason, the pre-parade ring at the July course in particular can get horses boiling over, and he boiled over that day, which is why, as I said, it was nice to be able to take him to the July course and walk him around and have a good experience there, because I think that will help him a lot. And we'll do things slightly differently. We'll box him to the stables the morning of, and then lead him over from the stables, I think, rather than boxing him up, and just hope. He's been a lot more professional since then this year. I hope he'll be fine, but we'll just try and tick every box and see how we go.
That Musselburgh race is working out nicely, though, isn't it? There's a number of horses come out of it and enhanced the form.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, the Irish horse that came over won the following day, and then Tim Easterby's sprinter, Castellan Prince, I think it was. That doesn't sound right. He won at Chester. So no, form looks solid, and we'll see how we go.
Brilliant. Just before we close this section off, Harry, the one interesting bit of information Ollie did tell me was that something you share with Hayley's a passion for snooker.
Yeah.
Who's your favourite snooker player?
Oof. Jimmy White, probably.
I was going to ask, actually, who's your favourite snooker presenter?
Well,
Who is your favourite player?
probably Jimmy White.
Oh, yeah, the world's been
Yeah.
Still one of the great injustices in sport. He never won the world title.
Yeah, no, I think it's like sports as well sometimes, and I mean, you guys know better than I do, but it becomes so professional. You don't have as many characters as you used to, and that's just part of it, isn't it? But that era and that of characters was definitely bang up there.
Well, Harry, thank you so much for sparing the time to chat to us. And once again, Ollie Bell is wrong with his nothing wildly interesting.
Yeah.
And best of luck for the week ahead, especially with Ancient Times at Newmarket. And well done so far. Yeah. Wonderful to see the success that you've had. Regards to your dad and family.
Thank you.
And thanks again for the time. Harry Eustace.
Yeah. Pleasure. Thanks very much, guys. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very much to Harry Eustace for coming on the show, and good to hear from him. Best of luck with his runners for the week ahead. But now it's time for Talking Topics. And this week, the subject of jockeys, riding, bans, etc. is in the news again, with a couple of quite notable incidents. Sam, obviously we spoke quite a lot about jockeys and bans and whether the rules are right, as we do every year, every season. Nothing very much changes, but we did that at Royal Ascot, and we're doing it again after another weekend where we had a couple of incidents, one at Haydock and one at Sandown. Let's deal with the Haydock one first, because it's quite a complex one to solve. Rab Havlin, 5 days for careless riding, free win trying to go up the inside of Ashada and Jim Crowley. I'm confused by this decision. Perhaps you can make sense of it for me.
If you're confused, what hope have I got? Yeah, baffling, if I'm honest. But the only thing I'd say in mitigation for the stewards is that they've probably got access to more camera angles than we have. They've probably seen the scout cam. I haven't seen that yet, I must admit, because being at Edgbaston for a couple of days, so I'm sort of a bit late to the party with this, and I didn't see it live. But what I find baffling about this is this unwritten code that thou shalt not go up the inner, which jockeys like to exploit. So you can leave a gap there and force horses 2 or 3 horse widths off the rail and race where you want to race and make them have to come round you on bends and things like that. But if anything dare go and use that gap up the inside of you, then you're allowed to shut the door. And Jim did do that. It was race riding. It was careless for me. And I thought that of the two, like a lot of people did, that probably it was Jim Crowley that should have got the censure, not Rob Havlin. Now, Rob is apparently found guilty of keep persisting for the gap that was there. Well, I think I've listened and read a number of top quality riders speak about this. Richard Hughes being one of them, George Baker, Racing TV's George Baker, and both of them say if you half pull out of a gap when it presents itself, you risk the real likelihood of coming down. Now, it was a pretty unsavoury incident. Thankfully, it didn't affect the results of the race particularly, unless Ashada had been knocked into and it cost her second place. But the best horse still won the race. But just how Rab managed to get a ban for that, I'm in all the years I've watched races, I don't quite get that. Do you?
I have. I watched it a couple of times, and I don't understand anything about it. If I'm entirely honest. You say we don't have access to every single thing in terms of what the stewards were looking at, but from what we can see, Jim Crowley and Ashada have come off the rail. The gap for free wind is obvious on the head-on. At the time of the race, you can see that there is a gap there. And I don't know whether Jim, it'd be lovely to hear his thoughts on it, because I don't know whether Jim thought nothing was coming up the inside, and then suddenly, or his horse was quickening or whatever, and felt that maybe nothing could get up his inside. And then suddenly he's seen or felt free wind coming up that gap, which was there. It's interesting because Ram Havlin said afterwards, he said that the stewards told him that they said he was trying to stay in there as the gap was closing. What I would then pose the question myself is, why was that gap closing?
Absolutely, it's because Jim had a little shifty over his left shoulder and very subtly shut that gap.
So who's closing the gap? It wasn't, and the fact that the stewards would therefore in that conversation with Rab have said, we've identified that there was a gap. The gap was closing. What am I supposed to do at that point? Who's closing the gap? It's not my fault. It's Jim's and his horse that are closing the gap. What am I supposed to do this? Apologies. I know that there was a gap there, but you come back. You were here about 20 yards ago, so you can get back in front of me.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
No. On racing TV as well, we sometimes show the sort of the navigation line, don't we, of horses, on the track. We pick it. It would be really interesting to see that, and it'd be very interesting to see whether stewards could have access to that as well. Sometimes that yellow line where it shows the course of the runners have taken up the straight or whatever. I think until we get a central panel of stewards, and I've been advocating this for a long time, I don't think we're going to get some consistency. I think you could show that race to 10 different sets of stewards, and I would think 9 of them would probably find Crowley guilty, and Haydock stewards found that it was Havlin that was guilty.
And this brings us back to the inconsistency that we keep facing so regularly. So Jim Crowley gets nothing. Rab Havlin picks up 5 days. Then over at Sandown, Christophe Soumillon got 12 days for what's deemed careless. After they crossed the line in the Eclipse on Vadeni, he allowed his horse to drift over and hampered a couple of horses in behind. And then throw into the mix, obviously, what happened at Ascot with Paul Hannigan and it's to me, we've just had a 3-week spell where everything's all over the shop, and there's no baseline that you can operate from. It's just too random.
Yeah. The Soumillon incident was dangerous for me, and I don't know whether I'd have given him 12, because I don't think it was any more dangerous than the crime that Paul Hannigan committed, the grand larceny almost at Royal Ascot, where he wiped out half the field. But I think Sumi deserves censure for that, because yes, we want to see winning riders celebrate. It adds a bit of colour, a bit of glamour to a big race day. And his son was obviously up on the bank, and he was looking and filming the race, and Sumi was looking at his son, and in the heat of the moment, the sort of excitement and celebration overtook him a little bit, but he nearly put 2 riders over the rail there and caused a serious incident, and we'd be talking about that for the next 10 years than we would Vadeni's performance, for me.
And I'm afraid that's what I see every time one of these incidents. I know, Kevin Blake has gone on about it, and I think he's right, that there'll be people out there saying, how many times do we have to see an incident like what happened in the Lancashire Oaks on the weekend? Obviously, what Paul Hannigan and the Riddler did in that race. Then on at Sandown, it keeps happening. And at the moment, we're getting away with it. Thankfully, you said it yourself. Thankfully, the horse won, and in Free Win's case, and everything seemed to be okay. But one day, something untoward is going to happen. Why can't we do something before that happens to help funnel and give the jockeys clarity in their own mind what they should and shouldn't be doing? Because we have these incidents repeating themselves, and I fear there's a danger that we will only act after an incident results in something really unpleasant. And why should we wait for that?
Freddie Talicki would surely put to that. What happened to him was desperately sad, and has been desperately sad, and curtailed a very, very bright riding career. Thankfully, he's making his way in the media. But how many more of these lessons do we need to look? It's a dangerous sport, and everybody's aware of the risks. If you're an F1 driver, you get in a Formula One car, you're aware that your life is in danger, and jockeys, whether they are a little blasé about that or not, that is also a case in point for them. But when it's and accidents happen, we realise that. But when it's careless or reckless or lack of due care and attention, I can't understand that. I couldn't understand Sumi on Saturday. you know, you go over the line. Yes, okay, you're in the heat of the moment, and you've enjoyed a wonderful race and a great victory, etc. And you get overtaken by the emotion of that, but you still have to be aware of what's around you. You're on horses that are still travelling at probably 30 miles an hour, 25, 30 miles an hour. And that was very unsavoury, I thought, and, you know, poor from him, really. He's a better rider than that. And I think you've just got to have respect, really, for the people that you're riding against, and realise that surely that you've got a very potent, strong, powerful being under you, you know, equine being underneath you. And, you know, that can cause a lot of damage if you're not careful.
Well, I mean, Sam, you know, we've spoken on this particular podcast about many subjects in racing that continue to bug us, to, I feel, keep the sport a little bit behind the times, behind the curve, but nothing ever changes. Nothing ever changes. We go round and round in circles, talk about it time and time again. We'll probably be talking about it in a few weeks' time, and more incidents. Nothing will change. Committees will be formed. But sorry,
we love a committee, don't we, racing? We love a committee.
But we do. But ultimately, we do love racing and the horses, and hopefully that will keep us entertained in a positive way. I'll give you the last word on the thing you're looking forward to most this coming week, Sam. I mean, I know you've tipped Creative Force, but what are you looking to most this coming week?
I think without being too romantic about it, seeing a decent crowd back on the July course, because I think last year was it limited numbers.
Yeah.
You know, the commentary was very echoey. I think if we get some nice weather, and not too raucous an atmosphere, but a good atmosphere there, it's a brilliant place to be if you get like dry, clement weather, isn't it? And I think we could see some real superstars this week on the track there, and I think it's a great sort of midsummer highlight that week if the weather's nice. So hopefully the crowds will flock back. The pricing will be reasonable. Hopefully we'll be able to get, you know, a good few patrons into Newmarket, and we'll see some cracking racing. Hopefully Inspiral will win. Hopefully Creative Force and Perfect Power will throw up a great July Cup for us to view.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Sam. I hope that you're right in everything you say for the week ahead. Thank you all for joining us for this week's episode of Racing Weekly, brought to you by oddschecker in association with Bet365. Thanks as always to the excellent Sam Turner for joining me, and also to Harry Eustace for being generous with his time this week. As always, if you like what you've heard or seen in this, or indeed any previous episode, then leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or in the comments section on YouTube. Next week we'll be back having a look back at the July Festival. We'll also look forward to the Irish Oaks, and we're going to be joined by a dear friend of Sam and a colleague and someone who knows a little bit about racing and about finding winners, and that is Andy Holding. So we look forward to that. But for now, from Racing Weekly team, bye-bye.